Hi, Cassie. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kalli. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. And I always start the podcast with the same question. How do you keep yourself well?
Yeah, well, a few different things. Definitely sleep's big for me, first and foremost. Trying to stay on top of my sleep and my nutrition and fitness. I actually can't run. I've got a little bunged up knee, but I definitely can work out and bike. And I go to actually an F45 here. I like doing those. I like to golf, play hockey. And then obviously take care of my own mindset, making sure, whether it's meditation, journaling, self-reflection, leaning on, my spouse or others to reflect and make sure I'm managing my own stresses and processes. Sometimes, as a performance coach, I get caught up in helping everyone else manage their stress, and I'm like, oh, what about myself? And it's like, I'm fine. I'm like, no, I'm gonna make sure I'm dealing with my own expectations and feelings. So it's that'd be the short summary, but yeah, it's trying to tackle all the fundamental pieces and do the best I can while having two young kids. That makes it a little bit more interesting. But
Yeah.
so yeah,
Well, and another
that's
example of, yeah, taking care of yourself while you're taking care of everyone else, your family, your clients. And one of the reasons I love this question so much is because every guest highlights something new. So something that stood out to me is giving yourself that permission to lean on others for support as well when you are, so often the one taking care of everyone else. So I think that's really incredible. And take me back to where this all started. So you were a young athlete, hockey player. What role did mental performance play when you were younger? When did you become aware that this was part of the game?
yeah. So yeah, and again, leaning on others is so important. And I started doing that when I was 16. I got a psychologist, mental performance coach, sports psychologist, and she was really helpful. And just, for myself, I was like, had all this pressure and the adversity, and I never really, known how to actually handle it all and deal with it. And so I started to get some strategies and found that very helpful. And then throughout my career, I kind of kept learning and finding different strategies that worked. And I'd say I learned the long and hard way through my career. And then I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way, and wanted to keep learning. That's what inspired me to go do my schooling, read hundreds of books on the topic, learn from some of the other top performance experts in the world like Todd Herman and John DeMartini. And that's what kind of led me to doing the work that I do now. But it all started when I was, a teenager, not managing my own emotions, dealing with a lot of adversity and failure, having all these expectations and holding on to it and chasing it and being worried about the results instead of my own mindset and who I wanted to be. And so it's been an interesting journey, but it's fun to now get to do the work that I do now.
Good for you. I think that's so amazing at 16 that you had that foresight. Was it encouraged by coaches or caregivers, or was it something that you kind of naturally started seeking on your own?
Yeah, I was more my I was always interested in the mindset, the mental game to a degree. And I think, it was actually when I broke my jaw. So I broke my jaw when I was 16. I got a puck in the jaw, I got my mouth wired shut.
Oh,
And so then coming back from that, the it was like, well, maybe like I should, have someone help with my mindset, my mental game. My season hadn't started the way I wanted either. And then I got hurt. So, and my uncle knew an Olympian who had a sports psychologist that he really liked and recommended. So that's how I got hooked up with her, and she was great. So gave me some strategies to get back, overcome. I went into the next season, which actually did not go well. As I went up into the next level, then I kind of like my performance dropped and didn't, and it kind of got put through the ringer. But she definitely gave me some tools to help me get through that and really start to develop my own mental game and understand it better. And so that's what kind of sparked the interest in the learning.
wow, how neat. And so how did you move then from athlete into coaching people in the mental side of things?
Well, one of the early kind of story was when I was like 19. My parents were like, you should get a job. I was like, what? It's like, what do you mean? Like, and I just want to be a hockey player. And so one of the jobs I got or I did was start my own business. as like a hockey coach where we did skills training, workouts, and a little bit of mental training. I was like, we called it complete hockey training. And it was really cool in my hometown in North Bay, like a small little city, and give like hockey specific, well-rounded training. So I was already starting to coach people on their mindset then. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was give them something because it was just like it's helpful for these up and coming young players. And I ran that business for a long time. And then so kept doing it, kept coaching people, coached people as an actual like hockey coach as well, a little bit while I was in school. And I've always had the idea like I really liked what that psychologist that I had did. I thought it was really cool. I was like, I would always be interested in doing that. So when I did my schooling, um, I had that in mind. I did my master's, my PhD. So it's always been in my mind to do it as potentially as a full-time thing. And then once I finished my PhD, I was like, all right, now let's make it a full-time thing. Whereas before it's just like doing it on the side, have a team here, workshop here, client here and there. It was hard when school was the main priority. It was hard to do it full-time. So, um, but I've been working on it for, over 20 years now in a way. So I'm working on the mental game. So, and coaching people. So, yeah.
And your own mental game to have the fortitude to go through a PhD. What was your thesis on?
The coach, positive youth development in elite youth sport, and particularly looking at the coach's role. So, coaching athletes in elite sport or youth elite sport. So,
Wow.
and positive youth development, life skill development. So all that kind of good stuff. Yeah.
Well, yeah, at that age, like, 16 is so transformative. And like where I'm from, it's I'm sure very similar. Every 16-year-old hockey player, I think like the goal is the NHL, and there's a lot of pressure, and you're traveling, like living and playing away. And even that aspect of, not just the pressure of the sport, but, being away from your foundation for your first time in the whole life, to have someone working with you is huge.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
for sure. And again, that's having other people to lean on it just helps you see your blind spots and help you. I was saying this to one of my pro clients the other day, but just about, the ability, most people just like aren't even aware of their feelings or voice them out. And so if you just don't be aware and get the opportunity to voice the feelings, the worries, the concerns, then you're not going to process them. And you just eat like, and then how does that affect your relationships? How does that affect how you show up at work or in other areas of life? It eats up at you and it nags on you, and that's this chronic stress. And there's and then it cascades into more problems. And it's like it's not that hard to just lean on people, become self-aware. You've got an issue, like try to vocalize it and work through it. And because he was just alluding to like, oh, my relationships, everything's just feeling way easier now. Like I was like, yeah, because you're just putting things out there and working through it. So it's and it was just a cool example.
Well, and I was going to ask, I guess I'm sure it's different working with younger athletes, and now you're working with generally older athletes, I imagine, like more with the
Yeah.
pros. But, in younger athletes, what the most common challenges you would see are, like, if it's performance anxiety, I'm sure that's more a symptom of like what is the fear causing that
Yeah.
anxiety. So what are some of the most common problems that you work with athletes to kind of move through?
Yeah. And I would say the root of the issue is the same, whether it's a pro athlete, 12-year-old or 16-year-old, or even a business executive or surgeon. And, there's anybody pursuing high performance. The main issue, which is then the whole premise of my book. Oh, sorry. Just a second, something in my throat. You can cut that out if you want, but sorry.
You can edit anything.
But and yeah, but though the main issue, regardless of the person, is we chase and we hold on to the external results. The priority is what do I want to achieve? And when we're so focused on the outside world and that validation or what other people think and achieving the results, and then we allow that to dictate how we feel. And so I call it very much an outside-in approach, a results first. The priority is the results. And then what we want to do is flip it. It's like, it's not focused on the results. Okay, what do I got to do to get the results? And the last thing is I focus on like, well, who do I want to be? Like, how do I want to show up? It's like, no, let's flip the priority. So the keyword's priority. You can still have the goal, but what matters most to you, or what do you choose to matter most, or what do you focus on the most, or give the most power to? And like, let's prioritize inside out. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? Why am I doing this in the first place? What's the love of the game, the intrinsic drivers? And when we get clarity and certainty of who we want to be, well, then the actions flow and you're more likely to get the results. And so this is the mindset first approach. This is an inside out approach where we take control of our mindset, our inner game, and then we go tackle the outer world and just slow down a bit, look within and be mindful. That's the solution. But the problem, the most common thing, where the anxiety comes from, where the frustrations, where the, beating yourself up, the narratives that don't serve us come from this outside in approach where we're not even slowing down and thinking about who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up? We're just like, well, what's going on around me? Well, guess that's who I am. And like, that's how I feel. And this is what I'm, anxiety to a degree. I'm not a clinical psychologist, but people that are worried about the future, where does that come from? That's outside in. I'm so worried about what's the external thing. It's a symptom of your approach to life. Your approach is outside in. And that's where the anxiety and worry of the fear comes. So if we flip it and you start living with inside, who do I want to be today? You won't be anxious because you're not like, how do I want to show up and what do I want to go do, which leads to the results versus what's going on, what could happen, and how does that make me? That's going to lead to feeling anxious and worried, or I'm frustrated and pissed and down and sad because you're looking at what? Well, what happened? What's happening in the past? Oh, how's that make me feel? Versus, all right, what happened? How can I own it? And then what am I going to do today? How am I going to show up? Who do I want to be? How do I want to respond to what's happening? Now you're not going to hold on to the sadness or the frustrations and it's going to linger and you can move forward. So, and a lot of that work, fun way, I know I'm spitballing a couple directions here, is learning to write your own story, being the author of your own life versus, we're not just what we do or achieve or feel or think. We're more than that. We're more than just a character. We're the author of our own story. We have awareness and choice, and we can be aware of what's going on and then choose how we want to respond and who we want to be. So that's a fundamental way of looking at like, well, what's the most common issue? It's outside in, chasing results, very worried about what the outside world thinks and how that makes us feel. And therefore the solution is to flip it. And easier said than done because our culture is very much pushes an outside in approach and lives that way. And marketing and media and things will push that outside, in perspective. But yeah, it's the root cause of most of the things that I see and work with.
Oh, yeah. I like to say simple but not easy, like theoretically that all makes
Yeah.
sense. And I wish that I knew you existed when I was deep in my performance anxiety as a high school athlete. It would have saved me so much. But
Yeah.
I also really think that's
Yeah.
interesting that it's essentially versions of the same problem, no matter kind of
Mhm.
age and level you're at. Something that I was thinking as you were saying
Yeah.
that is, do you ever have whether, just, I guess I'll just say clients, athletes, or high performing professionals that are resistant to change because they think that they will lose their edge, like I only succeed because I'm so hyper vigilant, I'm so anxious, like I have to be this intense about it. And, that's all they know is that this far that formula works for them.
Yeah. So, not too much, because usually once people see it and they'll be like, all right, yeah, I got to let go of that and do this and be light and free. That's going to help me be better, and make sense. And they've probably already done it to some extent at different times. And I'll give though a funny, interesting example. Like I have one of my new clients had a really good year last year, and pro client in the NHL had a good season, but in that season he read my book near the end, and in the book, and then he found that it was already helping him play even better. He was detaching from the results. But this has been a guy that's been obsessed about results his whole life, so like most, and and then he started to let go and already helped him play better. So then we were meeting, we started working together this summer, and I go like, all right, the general approach you've been using your whole career, I'm going to tell you to throw it out and get a whole new one. It's like, and part of me is like, what if I screw this guy's career up? Like, what if it doesn't work? Like, I was even almost doubting it to a degree. But then I was like, well, no, I know it works. It does work. It does help. And he's already started to apply it and already found it helpful. So, and one key thing is, it's not that I want him to not want the goal any less. It's not like I want him to care less about the results and be any less ambitious and be driven. You can still be very ambitious and driven. It's how you're going about the pursuit of that goal. Are
Hmm.
you going about it the hard way? The hard way is I need that goal, and how I feel is based on how I'm getting towards it. And so it's a lot bumpier and it's a lot harder, and you might face more adversity, and you still could get there or close to it. Versus like, hey, we can still have that goal, but how you're getting there is a different route. You're taking a different, part of the mountain where it's the priority is now who you're being along the way. And it's gonna be a lot more stable. And it's actually gonna be easier and more likely to now get there.
Mhm.
And more enjoyable too. And
Yeah.
so it's not about actually changing their, natural ambition. It's just giving them a different approach to look at the pursuit of high performance. And then once people see it and they feel like, oh yeah. And a lot of these athletes and high performers, they've done it to degrees. There's been games where they're like, all right, detach, like fully free, like accept the range. And they've played great. Can they do it game in, game out? Well, if they haven't really, it might be common sense, but not always common practice, and they haven't personalized their strategies, and they don't fully understand some of the nuance and personalize it to them, they don't do it consistently. They can do it like once, but then it's whereas I want them to consistently flip the switch, dial in, have that approach day in, day out, not to be perfect, because that's a trap, but they're doing their best at it. They're intentionally working on their mindset, their approach. And that's where you get the really good consistency. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say joy, like how many high achievers do we know who they got there and sucked the fun out of everything. Their relationships weren't there. They had no one to celebrate with, like don't even take that time. So yeah, making it enjoyable as you achieve it. And I'm just thinking too, with early specialization, so many people are having to specialize so early to be successful like this. And I mean, even just continue specialization until eventually, especially with your clients who are athletes, retirement, that this work would also cross over to then like, okay, what's next? And how do you continue to approach life? Because that's something I'm always so, fearful of, like for the athletes and professionals that we know and love is eventually, unless you're one of the very elite few who I don't know who's Tom
Yeah.
Brady is like however old still going, but it
Yeah.
ends eventually. So is that something you work
Yeah.
with them along the way, or is it more during like their active seasons and then, well, they go to someone else?
Yeah.
Their own?
No, a bit of both. I'd say like definitely along the way, even with the younger athlete, let alone definitely the older ones, it's helping them with more than just applying it to help them perform at their sport and enjoy their sport and their mindset while they're playing. It's like, well, how are you with your relationships? How are you with school? Like, how are you showing up in life? Right. And developing the habits and the intentionality of who they want to be, right? And how they want to live. And by doing that, and having that awareness and developing that approach to different areas of life, that's going to definitely help them when it's time to transition, from sport being their main, part of their identity or a big part of their identity, a main consumption of time and energy, to now transitioning to whether it's coaching or business or family or whatever happens as they transition away from sport being a top priority. Um, so yeah, so that's a way I look at it. And again, then somebody that's older, where there's a lot going on in their life away from their sport, it's definitely a priority because think of like a pro athlete with millions of dollars on the line. Well, if their relationships aren't well, and like there's stress outside of the rink or their field of play, and they bring that to the field of play, like, and like it's we got to learn to process this, because it can affect you when you're at the rink. You're going to be more agitated. You're not going to be as in the moment. We can learn to like separate it, but it's actually quite helpful to also learn to just deal with it. So like, this is probably a more effective strategy than just separating from it all the time. And so if we can learn to deal with it, now there's just, you know, you're a calmer, more meaningful life away from their sport too. So that does come up, and it is part of the work. And then that's already, again, then going to set them up for, all right, well, what do I want to do next when my sport ends? Or, and making sure they have good relationships with their family. A lot of athletes will ruin their relationships, you know, with different people in their family. Then their sport ends, is like, well, now what? It's like you burn these bridges, haven't been there for your kids or your wife or your spouse, and and then you know, your life's a bit of chaos, like during, let alone after. And I use the line I really liked lately, which is I think very impactful, and something I've said before, but I like the distinction where it's like a lot of athletes will fall into this trap where it's like, if you're better at your sport, like if you achieve the goals, does that make you a better person? The obvious answer is no, it doesn't. Think it's like, if you're the best hockey player, you're the best in your league or your team, are you a better person than somebody that's not? Or vice versa. If you're not, and you're like middle or bottom, and someone's, you know, performs, but are they a better person than you? Like, of course not. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, but subconsciously, we'll make those associations. Be like, if I do this, I'm a more successful person now. Like, what? Like maybe you are a better hockey player, or you're better in that, like that you have achieved that result. But as a person, like playing that game of who's a better person, me versus you, or that person, like what an unhealthy game to be playing. And the weight and the pressure and the stress of all of that, and you know, that can make you inflated and deflated if things are going your way or not as a
Right.
human. It's like, nah, like, yeah, you've achieved a goal. Like, yeah, you are a faster hockey player than that hockey player because of the work, but you're not better than them. Like, you're not a better person. Like, so detaching and making that very separate of like who you are and your capabilities in your sport does not make you a better or worse person. And even just playing that game is a very dangerous game to play in the first place. You know, there's a time and a place to be like, that guy's a bad person. Like, maybe like Hitler was like, we can maybe use that terminology and can agree. And
Okay.
like, you know, there's a time and a place for it. But generally, we like, you know, doing that's just going to create all kinds of elated, deflated, tension, emotional charges, in a way that's unhealthy. Whereas we're all just, you know, living our own lives, and it's our own journey. Comparing one person's journey to another is ridiculous. Like, so generally speaking. So that's I forget why I went there, but the transitions in life, and these are life skills and a mindset that serves. And so then when they're transitioning, they're not falling into these traps of like their whole identities attached to different things, or their success as a person. Like, they get to define their own definitions, and be intentional about who they're being. So a
Yeah.
bit of a rant there, but I
No,
thought it
it's
was
perfect. It's so important. And so what is the process when someone wants to work with you? How do they start working with you? And then is it weekly sessions? They obviously read your
yeah.
book. What is the process of working with someone long term as a client?
Yeah, it varies, but a couple ways to look at it. One, I think the book Mindset First is a great place to start if you're unsure, because then you kind of like get a lot out of it, and you kind of get, oh, that's what they do and how they do it, if that makes sense. Like, they see the concepts, they see the strategies, and then how someone starts. So the main company I have is called CEP Mindset, and so we're like a mental performance coaching firm. So we have like 20 coaches. And so people will book in through that site with like our admin team, and then they'll find the coach that's the best fit for you, based
Oh,
on price, based on experience, based on, you know, who's available, etc. And then they'll set up the athlete or the client or potential client for like just a meet and greet free intro usually. So it's like 30 minutes, get to know them, understand, and then there's a recommendation on a program. So some are shorter programs, some are year-long programs. Some people will do a year long and then do more. You can always do more. But the premise is, it starts with like getting filtered in a way, or getting sorted, and be like, all right, find your right fit. Then you meet and greet, and then you start a program. And then the programs, I always say, are like front loaded. You want to get the ball rolling, get through, clear the biggest mental blocks, develop the fundamental strategies, things like the alter ego, like the Black Mamba, which comes from my mentor, Todd Herman, the reset routine, which uses acceptance, commitment, getting their scorecard, reflections, imagery, mindfulness, intention practice. So all these fundamentals going, and then it's like a lot of it's maintenance, and there's other things we add and do, but it could be, you know, a couple hours at the start or an hour weekly. And then it goes, and a lot of our sessions will go to 30 minutes. We want to like coach people. It's not like, well, let's just talk forever and eat up time. Like, no, like, let's get to the point. What's going on? What did you learn? What can we add? What can we take out? All right, have some fun. Go get after it this week. And then check in next week. We have some that are bi-weekly, some are weekly. I'm a big fan. A lot of my clients will be on like results-based programs. So it's not about time. So there is a time component to it, but it's like, you need me, I call, like I answer, like, and I check in weekly. Um, and there's some other things I'll do. Maybe I'll watch, and so it's about the result of getting them in the right mindset, or the mindset that's going to be optimal, and making sure they stay and maintain that throughout a year. And then they're usually doing year over year in those kind of programs.
Cool.
So yeah, that's the rough gist of
Yeah,
it.
that ongoing support. And I mean, what have you learned about yourself through this process from student to teacher? And how do you continue to develop your skills while helping others?
Great question. Let's talk about me. Woo. So the way I like to look at it, I wrote like an article, I think it was like last year. It was like, some of my tendencies are um like, I want to do things fast. So what's the next thing? Like I want to go fast. It's like learning to be patient, like with building a team and a career, and be patient with all the goals that I might have, right? So patience has been something I've really reflected on and developed. Learning to say no. My mentor Todd's really been helpful, like especially as a business owner and entrepreneur. It's like, I just want to say yes to this. I want to do that. I want to say yes to this. So like, I would like, and then I've got all these projects and all these priorities, like then nothing gets done. And like, I'm just spread too thin and overwhelmed. And so it's learning to say, nope, 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 what matters most, and be strategic. You know, that was a big one. And, and then I also think like, you know, one of the other interesting things is just learning to really write and speak and marketing and creativity. Whereas I've generally been a very analytical, love math, sciences, like, what's right, what's wrong, like judge things. And it's like, no, there's a creative process in life. Learn to appreciate that has been a unique, you know, development for me, and doing speaking courses, writing the book, doing marketing stuff. Like I was always like, ew, marketing. It's like, it's like, well, like, no, I kind of like learn to enjoy it. Cause of like, if I can't get the message out there, we can't, you know, work with people, we can't help people. We can't, you know, creating a YouTube video or whatever can help, like, you know, people can get a lot out of those things. And so there's benefit to doing it, but like, how do you do it where people will actually watch or listen, and like titles and those, like, you know, and tapping into a more creative side's been fun. So I don't know if that answers the question, but those are some of the top ones that come to
Good
mind.
for you. Well, I was just thinking too, even like the marketing, what did you say before? Write your own story. So you're
Yeah.
rewriting how you approach marketing. It doesn't have to be an infomercial. You can make it cool,
Yeah,
update it.
exactly. Yeah.
So what what was your schooling? Because you are not a clinical psychologist. So what's your
Yeah.
PhD?
My PhD is in like sports psychology, so it's like more research based. So there's pretty much like, I don't know, there's a few different streams, but there's the clinical route where you then go and learn how to treat and diagnose anxiety, depression, etc. And then you'll work with more like severe clinical cases. And then there's like a sports psychology route, which is more performance psychology, and it's about helping people perform. And so you're not going to be licensed to treat
Mhm.
you know, anxiety and depression and stuff, but
Yeah,
you'll
more
work with
that
high performers. Yeah,
the
so that,
social.
and there's some different schoolings and different ways, like, you know, CMPC is like kind of like the gold standard for that. It's like a certified mental performance coach, which most of our, or a lot of our coaches have, but like some schoolings, like my schooling, I couldn't easily get that. So I don't even actually have that yet. I could get it, but it was just the hoops I couldn't actually jump through it yet. Just, and then my daughter came, and clients generally don't care if you have it. And listen, my clients don't, but so, but there's, so that's, but it's more of just, you're a coach, right? You're not a clinical license. Like, so we have a few clinical people. So if somebody actually came in and they had depression or anxiety, like a severe thing, like they would go to them, not me, or one of, or the coach that's not qualified. And so, and if somebody I was working with had a clinical thing going on, be like, I'd have to refer out, be
Right.
like, you should go talk to a
Yeah.
clinical therapist to deal
Nice.
with and treat that. Yeah. But so they're in the same spectrum in the area, but it's a different type of schooling. So like my undergrad was in kinesiology. I ended up finishing my undergrad, and like sports psych's a sub part of kinesiology. So
Oh,
um
very cool.
yeah, versus
Cool.
the deep clinical psych stuff.
Yeah.
So
And then you really had to commit to get through a
yeah.
PhD.
Oh yeah.
And obviously you're a high performer. And I think it's cool when you talk about, your client base, like it's athletes, hedge fund managers, surgeons, like just high performers, like typically highly
Mhm.
motivated people. How do you see people move from one level to the next when it comes to mental performance? Like, do you see that as people move through these levels of performance and whatever their area of interest is, there's kind of a formula to shifting mentally to that next level?
Yeah, well, again, as they go through the foundations and they go from prioritizing who they want to be, like instead of like the results, they'll definitely start to level up. They get more consistent, the confidence is there, the resilience is growing. But one of the unique things is like if I just put it at three simples, like, oh, it's kind of messy. All right, starting to stabilize. And then there's probably another level where it's like, well, let's get it to even like not just good, but like great. Like let's get it dialed in consistently, really refine it, really personalize it. And then they can always evolve because it's like, well, let's go work on a new part or a new part of my life or a new, project or challenge that might come up. But the other big one that it will eventually lead to, and some sooner than later, is leadership based practices and behaviors. Because as soon as you take care of yourself and you're in a inside out approach, you're clear on who you want to be and you're being confident, resilient, you're automatically becoming a better leader just by example. And you're in a grounded state where you can communicate more easily and effectively. But the other side of it is like, well, knowing how to influence and encourage and guide, a team or individuals that are going through different challenges or navigating crucial conversations. So there's a whole other echelon of leadership too. And again, it never ends because then it's all of a sudden it's like, yeah, somebody's growing and they're doing leadership stuff. And then the environment changes. There's a new role, there's a new challenge, there's something happens. Well, how are we going to be through that? Because like it never ends, the learning and growing and looking within. And so everybody can always have a sounding partner, someone that's in their corner, that's just a mirror and a guide and a person to lean on. And so that's kind of I don't know if that helps kind of give you like the levels, and that's kind of like a never ending levels if it makes sense.
Well, I
So
even think just highlighting like, yeah, that shift to leadership and that
yeah.
mindset. Okay, and you said crucial conversations. Have you read that book? Because one of the questions that I want to ask is you said
Of
you've read
course.
like hundreds of books, and I don't want you to
Yeah.
give me your number one book recommendation yet. Okay, you're gonna save it, but I would love if you have like some of your top recommendation. Obviously, Mindset First is up there. We're gonna put that.
Yeah.
Everyone has to read.
Yeah.
But what are a few of the books
Yeah.
that you think everybody should be reading?
Yeah. Well, Crucial Conversations is definitely a great book. One of my friends also just wrote, I think it's called Tough Conversations, or How to Have Tough Conversations, which is kind of like would be similar. Um, but yeah, I think Crucial Conversations is great for leadership and handling it. It was really eye-opening when I first read that one. Um, the one of the ones obviously is Todd Herman's my mentor that I speak with frequently. He wrote the book The Alter Ego Effect. So that's one of our core strategies we use as well. And it's a really good way to understand narratives and the playful side to mindset and the mental game. Whereas a lot of times you get like the cookie cutter, fluffy, kind of boring stuff that doesn't work. Like, well, let's do thought stopping and let's do goal set. It's like those things aren't actually generally that helpful and like can actually it's like, but like, how can we be creative and work on our identity and who we want to be and be playful for that? So, anyways, Todd wrote a really good book. He's the guy again that helped create the Black Mamba, which is an alter ego type exercise. His book's really good. Um, if I gave another one, let's look at my list here. I don't know, I could probably give you 10 if you want, but uh, I'd also some of I found some like really interesting books too, not in sports psych. Like you think of books like that are fun to read, like the Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, like that book, like by Mark Manson, like kind of enjoyable, outside the box kind of thinking.
Mhm.
Obviously read lots of Malcolm Gladwell, but it depends on the topic you want to. But yeah,
Okay,
those would be
those are
some of the
good
ones that come to mind.
recommendations.
I can pull up my list. So,
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, and your book obviously is not only good for high performers, but I think
Mhm.
we all, no matter who we are, like the layperson, has that part of us that would like to be a high performer and just to level up mentally. So, how do you think our mental game affects like the day to day for the average person? And what are some kind of actionables that we could give to those who aren't professional athletes?
Yeah. Well, there's a range of people's ambitions and how they live life. And I think if you're somebody that is ambitious and you're trying to maximize your impact on your career, it's definitely going to be easily applicable to that and like dealing with the stress and the challenges of pursuing that. And then on the flip side, it can be a nice way to reflect on navigating life. Are we on cruise control too much? We're just going through the routine and we're just like, not being intentional about the life we want, how we want to live. Like, I'm constantly like asking people's like, who do you want? Like, how do you want to live? What do you want your relationship to be like with your spouse? Like, how do you want to spend your time? Like, and then these can be strategies within that and ways of thinking to help you break free of just a general routine and find more joy, meaning, and an impact within your life. So that'd be another way of looking at it. For maybe it's like, oh, well, I'm not really trying to like get to the next level or achieve this goal or this and that. It's like, yeah, but like, do you feel like you're stuck, or do you feel like you want more impact or meaning? Then it could also be beneficial for that. And it's just a self-reflective.
Mhm.
The book's meant to be very practical and very to the point. It's concise and so it's like, oh yeah, you can get a bunch of little nuggets and some strategies, in a pretty quick read for the most part.
I
Yeah.
like that the like actionable strategy. You're really building a mental toolbox, which then
Yeah.
you can take with you wherever you go. And obviously we can't overhaul things in a day, but we have goals. And I know you mentioned like a little bit about goal setting, but you mentioned that some of your programs are results focused.
Mhm.
And I'm just
Mhm.
thinking, how does one kind of chart and keep track of maybe mindset
Yeah.
goal? You had advice for that. It's not like
Yeah.
I went to the gym for 30 minutes today, I followed my day. I can check that off,
Yeah.
but I think it's a little bit more challenging to conceptualize some of the mindset goals.
Yeah, well, one of the first things we do is have them do a mindset assessment. So it's a subjective self-assessment, but we would ask people, there's varying questions, but as an example, is like what percentage of your time and energy were you in the flow state? Were you just in the moment? And a good way to look at it, like if we're dialed in the moment and present, you're more likely going to be performing at your capabilities. Those things kind of go hand in hand. I use the analogy of a driver and of a car and like the race car. If you've got a really good race car, but if you don't have a great driver, you're like you won't get the most out of that race car. And so we're working on the driver, making sure the driver's present, confident, trusting themselves, so they get the most out of the car. And so oftentimes an athlete, as an example, is coming in because, oh, they're getting 50% of the car's performance, their on ice performance or sport, because their mindset is like 50%. Like they're like, I only trusting myself 50% of the time. I'm present 50% of what it could be. So then we use that as like a baseline measure. Well, we're trying to get that number up. And the way so it's a subjective thing. And we can even break it down into like, well, the subcomponents like confidence and focus and resilience and being, composure and dealing with pressure. And then it's like, oh yeah, so yeah, your average is 50, but like some of them were 60 and 70, but like confidence was like 30. So that's actually the biggest thing for us to work on. And then, so then we can come back to that and we'll even get athletes to create like their own little scorecard and some will use the numbers, there's different ways we do it. But the goal is if we use numbers is 95% plus. It's like, if you're feeling like, hey, I was in the flow state 95% plus, that's a huge check mark. You're doing your best. And then that evolves and looks different over time. And it's a subjective feeling, but it makes more tangible. It's like we call it like gamifying the mental game. And it's like, and we use 95 because we don't want it to be about perfection. I had 100% perfect mindset today. Well, now you're like trying to chase down perfection, which is actually going to hurt your mindset. So you're like, why am I not in a perfect mindset? It's like it's creating a downward spiral about your mindset, which happens. But then they hopefully learn from it. We try to minimize it from happening, but they have a perfectionist tendency and then they bring that to their mental game.
Mm.
And so I was working through that. But yeah, so that would be a way to like, and so again, it's like, oh, we're committed to someone's results on their mindset. So it's like, hey, how often can I get a pro athlete or any athlete to be 90, 95 plus dialed in? They feel like they're at their best throughout the game. And as an example of like a hockey player's got like 82 game season. Well, like, can we get them like 75 games at 95 plus? Like that'd be pretty solid. Like, you know what I mean? Like 70s, So, and it depends on when they start and where they are in their career and those things. And the environment matters. Because like one athlete, everything's going their way. The other one's facing big pressures, it's harder. Like it can be harder to be fully dialed in, but like that's the goal. That's what we're working towards. That's what our conversation is about. That's what the strategies help support. So um, it makes it a bit more understandable and tangible. And again, it's our commitment to it, but the athlete has to do the work. You got to want to be there too. And again, it's subjective, but we definitely want it better than what if it's like when a lot of people come into like 30, 40, 60, it's like, we don't want it in this range. We want to get up into this range. So
Wow. Yeah, I
yeah,
imagine. And so
yeah,
speaking of that, maybe like failure, obviously failure, whether it's on your mental game in the day or actual failure, in performance, what does a person do when they fail? And how do you overcome that failure, big or small, and not lead it to be that thing that is like, oh, now we're spiraling. Like I
yeah,
am a failure. I've not just lost the game. I am a failure. How do we prevent that? And
yeah.
use maybe to our
Well,
advantage, like it's part of it.
yeah, exactly. Well, I think the first thing is be very careful of our language, anytime we talk to ourselves, if we say, I am a failure, like, says who? Like, stop saying that. Like, it's like, no, I just failed and failure, like, all the best athletes have failed. Like, um, and so learning to normalize, like, we're not perfect. It's part of the process. We can learn from it. The other big thing is we do from John DeMartini's work is a lot of collapsing fantasy nightmares. So a lot of athletes and humans, we have like a fantasy around success, winning or achieving the goals, and a nightmare around losing or failure. And what happens when we see it as, the losing is all bad and the winning is all good? Well, it creates anxiety. It creates the fear of the bad thing and the need and the chase for the good thing.
Mm.
But it's not all good and it's not all bad. The reality is there's benefits and drawbacks to both. Of course, we want the win and we don't want the loss, but it's not inherently good or bad in and of itself. It's just a result based on the work you put in, your ability to be in the moment, and then the environment, the opponent. Like you could be really well prepared, really in the moment, and then your opponent is just like a superstar. Like, yeah, you're going to lose. Like that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's just a result, and vice versa. You win because your opponent's underprepared. Like it doesn't mean it's inherently. It's just a result. And so we start detaching from this emotional roller coaster of good and bad. That's going to help us that when we do face the failure, we don't have to beat ourselves up and own it and hold on to it in an unhelpful, unhealthy way. We can just own it and learn from it and grow from it and move forward and keep focused on who do you want to be. And so we're a lot more even keel along the way. So helping them get that perspective goes a long way.
Yeah, not stay stuck. And can you give us, like those who have never heard of the alter ego effect, like a quick overview of what that is? Because that sounds like something that anybody could take into their day to day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Todd's done a great job with it. And the way I like to explain it is it's a contrast. So you pick a field of play, like a moment of impact, like an area of your life, or in sport, being out on the ice or playing your sport. And it's having the awareness and reflection of like, okay, well, who do I want to be and who do I not? How do I want to show up? What does that look like and feel like? What's the narrative and identity? And what's the one I don't want? Like, and the contrast is helpful because then we can step into those traits because who we are when we're playing our sport is probably not going to be the same when you're playing with your kids or friends or social or at school. Like you bring out different traits in different areas of your life. And it actually can be problematic if you don't, right? Like I've had like some of my pro athletes, it's like, hey, they were, as a teenager, they were like, they were just mean. They're like pricks. They're a bit arrogant. And that actually kind of helps them on the ice to a degree. But then they were like ruining their relationships and unhealthy behaviors away. And then so then they start to learn and they're like, oh, I don't want to be like that all the time. I want to be nice and like enjoy life. But then what happens? If they bring that to on the ice, they're going to lose their competitive edge. So we got to we need different traits in different areas. And you got to learn to flip that switch. So that's the alter ego. That's the identity you step into. And you can be playful with it and come up with a name and know who you want to be and know who you don't want to be. And it's like, it's just so clear. The amount of times I've asked like a pro athlete, let alone amateur athletes, like who do you want to be out there? They're like, I don't know. Like if you don't know who you want to be and like what it looks like how are you going to do it? Like, you know what I mean? And another good way to look at it is I've seen athletes when they come in, they're like, hey, I know what I need to do. Like, I know I want to do this. Like, I really know but I'm not doing it because you're not feeling a certain way. The feeling who you're being leads to the doing. If you're fearful, it doesn't matter if you know you want to do this and you're trying to do it, but back of your head, it's feeling fearful. It won't happen. So
Mhm.
we take care of the feeling. I want to be in attack mode and swagger, and this is what I want to feel like. The doing just flows. All of a sudden, they're just, oh, now I can do it. That's like because they're focusing way much on the results and the actions and not enough on who they're being. So the alter ego does a great job of playfully creating stories around it because instead of being like, oh, I just want to be aggressive. Why? And I don't want to be scared. Okay, that's like pretty, like that might help. You want a bit more detail than that. But then it's really powerful. You create a story around it. It's like, hey, I want to be like, the black mamba, like which was, the analogy there was like the venomous snake that had the kiss of death and it was fast and it could kill its prey from far. Like there had these traits that Kobe wanted to step into. And so there's a story to it that and he unleashed it. And it's like the court was a cage and he would unleash the black mamba. It's like, oh, that is like, he is flipping the switch and letting it happen out there. So I've got lots of other, fun, cool examples, but those would be a way to look at the alter ego.
Well, I'm just thinking, yeah, not only makes it more playful, this is not just like mental homework that you're stuck, like being forced to drag your clients through.
Yeah.
Also, when you're practicing and you're visualizing, like, you're getting so many mental reps of like being in that alter ego, which sounds so effective, obviously. And so that said,
Yeah.
you've written the book, you're doing the public speaking, your business is thriving. What's next on the horizon for you as a high achiever? Because I'm sure you've got all the goals.
Yeah. It's just stabilizing is probably the main thing. I'll probably write some more books in due time, but it's making sure our firm and our practice is, really well taken care of. The structures there, the people, the processes are there, building that up so it keeps growing and the impact it has, because that's, a core thing. Obviously, continue to refine and do speeches and managing how much do I speak versus coach and manage it when I got young kids and like, what do I want to do with my time? So like it's being intentional, but and then eventually writing another book, which takes a lot of time and energy too. And so it's more, steady growth and maintenance right now, I think is kind of the approach because I've done a lot of we've been growing a lot and steady over the last few years. And there'll been a lot of like, all right, let's do the deep work of the book and do the deep work of the speech and do the deep work of like building the foundations of the business. And now there's, and building up the client list. And then I was like, okay, well, let's like, let's not just, topple over and go trying to keep overly growing and not have a good base and stable and and stop being intentional about it and just chase the next thing, which is one of my things. Gotta say no. No, there's a lot of shiny objects out there. Say no. Like so stick to the ones that matter most. So that's so it's probably just stick to the fundamentals is kind of a way I would answer that. That was long-winded.
No, good for you. Well, and you're practicing what you preach and using your own advice. Like, I think that's one of the hardest things as a coach. And I know you have your mentor. Do you work with a coach as well at this point?
Yeah, well, Todd's a coach. So Todd was a performance coach for athletes, and now he actually more, I think he coaches more business people, and he has a lot of business coaching programs. So he's kind of like my business coach and a
Oh,
mentor. So I'm in like one of his groups that we meet weekly, roughly.
yeah.
So
I think
when it
that's
works
I think
as a
it's
group, and
important to highlight because like all the
yeah,
highest level coaches have coaches too, and everyone has
yeah,
some. So that's it. Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up with a few quick rapid fire questions.
yeah.
So who do you consider to be your biggest role model if you have one?
It would be Todd. Yeah. So yeah, Todd
Right.
Herman. Yeah.
Sure.
So
Okay,
yeah,
so we got lots of books to read. So you need to read your book, his book, your favorite books, and
yeah.
what's the best advice you've ever received?
Depends on the different phases. But the current one I like, which is related to the no, is don't do dumb shit. So just kind of like like it's like meaning like chasing the different things. And then other ones around like grow, like it's just like stay connected to your why, or who do you want to be, like go from the inside out, that kind of advice. Yeah.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, best book. Now is where your number one. Best book or resource that you'd recommend to people.
Yeah, my favorite one. So I waited. I was like, I wanted to make sure you want to ask it. So Timothy Galloway's Inner Game of Tennis was one of my favorites,
Oh,
fundamental books on the mental game and really shifting our narrative around mindset, mental game. It was like from 1985, still well used.
oh,
Like it's there's certain things we don't use that are within it and that we've added, but a lot of like some good foundational stuff's in there. He was a like a lot of people read it, and it's about tennis, but it can be applied to anything. So
okay.
cool
Okay.
book.
A classic. And personal mantra or words that you live by.
Ooh. Um, Personal mantra. Well, that depends. So it depends again on the phase of life, but I would say uh you know, just prioritize who you want to be, like and
Oh,
like that kind of idea. Like focus on who you want
that
to be and how you want to show up. So
perfect. Well said. And last but not least, for everyone who wants to learn more about you, follow along and see what's next. Where can they find you?
yeah, so company's main site is cpmindset.com. Outside my personal site at drcassidypreston.com. We're on Instagram. I think our handle's CEP Mindset, and I'm not on Twitter and LinkedIn too much, but I try. I show up every now and then. So actually, I think we're on TikTok now. I don't ever go on it, but I think
Oh,
one of my team
trendy.
posts on TikTok. So I'm sure you
Amazing.
can find us there too. But
Yeah.
um, and yeah,
Well, we will
trendy.
link it
Yeah.
all. We'll link it
So
all for
yeah,
everyone to find.
yeah,
And I can't thank you enough. I feel like this conversation is going
yeah,
to be really important for so many people. And I just appreciate your time. And I can't wait to see what's next for you.
yeah. Love the questions. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate meeting you, Kalli.
My
Yeah.
pleasure. We'll see you soon.